The masks return. And not only one of them, all of them. What does that mean for us and what am I even talking about here? Today, Hi-Rez Ajax announced that the masks will return to Smite in patch 5.13, the mid-season patch. We've already talked about a lot of the changes yesterday, we'll quickly link that here if you want to check that out. Today we'll specifically talk about the masks. First, the description that Ajax added here. The tier 3 masks provide powerful bonuses, but they also cause you to lose stats. This full item tree is available to all gods and will add a big twist to class and role flexibility for all game modes. We already knew that items were coming, but I don't think many expected that this was going to be the result of that. I have been asking for a certain thing for quite a while, which is a developing jungler item that starts off somewhere as a rather simple item that gives you a little of sustain and then develops further into the game, so it's actually a valuable item to keep, such as we have in League of Legends. And I thought that would be a cool concept for Smite as well and would be a bit more interesting than your typical starter items, and there's a good chance that we're getting exactly that right now. The first mask that we can see at the bottom is 500 gold, the same price as boots, so it will probably have very minor stats and be something that you can add to your starter item at the start of the game and then build into those powerful or not so powerful additional stats, because you get a pro and a con with these masks. The first row of the mask here should be familiar to most of you unless you very recently started playing. We have Rangda's mask, Bumba's mask and Lono's mask. As a refresher for those of you who haven't been around for them or you already forgot what the exact stats were, Rangda's mask was previously 500 gold, it gave plus 5 MP5, and each time you get an assist you gain a stack or 2 for a kill. Stacks provide 1% movement speed and 1% cooldown reduction. At 10 stacks, Rangda's mask evolves, gaining 15 penetration. This item was a very high aggression one. It was kind of hard to implement into many builds, specifically because it had this mix of ability-based stats, but you also had to snowball hard enough, and then the movement speed wasn't quite that beneficial at the same time for an ability-based guard, so it was a niche item. For example, for Ao Kuang it was really good. Bumba's mask, on the other hand, was a lot more popular overall, as it was the main jungler item that is now replaced by Assassin's Blessing. The old stats, 50 health, 50 mana, and your basic attacks deal plus 15 true damage and your abilities plus 15 damage versus jungle camps. When a jungle monster is killed, only the closest ally god in assist range with Bumba's mask will be healed for 10% of the monster's health, restored 25 mana and given additional 4 gold. Then Lono's mask was the last one, which had a decent popularity at some point among supports. And this one came with plus 5 HP5 and being within assist range of a minion or jungle camp monster death without dealing the killing blow awards stacks. Only the closest allied guard in assist range with Lono's mask will get the stack. Stacks provide plus 2 max health per stack and stack up to 75 times. At 75 stacks, Lono's mask evolves, granting plus 400 gold to the wearer. So these are the old stats, but apparently a lot is going to change. Ajax announced a clarification. Although we did bring back the old mask icons, they do very different things than they used to. So we'll probably not see much of the old stats returning. The question is if they will be entirely erased or if there's at least a base concept in which, for example, Rangda's mask is still a high aggression mask or something like that. In terms of gold scaling, the masks get more expensive towards the top end, while the first parts are relatively cheap compared to other items. Other items often start around 700-ish gold, and then the second part is around 1500-ish gold depending, sometimes a little less. But these masks will really be more of a very cheap start. You start with a price tag of 500 gold, so once again, something you can fit into your build at the start of the game along with a blessing and still get some pots or even a chalice. And then you get the second part of the item for only an extra 700 gold with 1200. So very, very accessible. You can finish the second part on your first bag pretty much every single time. The question is if this is something that you can actually build that well right at the start of the game, because that really comes down to the stats of the second tier of the item especially. If you, for example, want to use this on a jungler, then the second item should ideally come with some movement speed, because otherwise at some point it's just not worth investing that much into a non-movement speed item. And likewise, if we go with a support item, it should provide some defensive stats at that point, because otherwise you might want to invest into other things first. On the other hand, with the price tag of only 1200, you can also consider just going into the tier 2 mask right away and skip the blessing if the tier 2 stats are anything beneficial for the start of the game, and you can opt into that freely. What I think is very likely is that the masks will remain with some sort of stacking mechanic, as that is really what they were known for, at least 2 of them, and it would seem like in the whole context of saying this is something that adds a big twist to class role and flexibility, that they have some special perks, and stacking items of that sort obviously are something that has special perks. But again, only speculation. But as we're going into the realms of speculation, let's speculate a little bit more here. First of all, we can go a little bit by the visual design of the masks. We have the mask on the left that looks very angry and aggressive, so I would not be surprised if this has some sort of power increase or penetration increase or any other sort of damage increase. The mask in the middle looks a lot more mellow and also uses less aggressive colors with purple, so I could imagine this being more of a defensive one or some other sort of helpful mask, maybe something like cooldown reduction or similar stats, something that provides utility. The mask on the right looks aggressive, it's somewhere in between the other two, but not quite as aggressive as the left one, obviously. So I would think that this one could also be a tank-oriented one, a defensive one, but, you know, defensive without being focused on cooldown reduction, but rather just raw defense stats. Just ideas, and also kind of based on the fact of which items they come from, with Rangdas previously being a high aggression mask and Lonos being the most defensive mask, and Bombas just being some in-between thing that helped jungler specifically. The reason why we can make this speculation is because the designs of items are made with an intention in mind. So for example, the artist would get told to make an item that looks aggressive, that looks like it has damage or something, and that's what happened with Rangdas. And then you have Bombas and then you have Lonos. And they all, you know, had their own perks, and that's what people associate with them now. Obviously, Hi-Rez could throw that concept over completely and make Lonos the most aggressive one, but I really would not see the point in that. It would just confuse people for no reason at all, so why would they do it? The most interesting part that comes in terms of information is the 2 parts coming together of you losing stats with the tier 3 masks, not before apparently, so you can safely invest into the tier 2 of the mask and not lose anything, but then at the later stage you will lose something. And at the same time, those masks are supposed to add a lot of class and role flexibility for all modes. Keeping in mind that all modes are mentioned here, it's very likely that things revolve around the base stats somehow. Maybe it's even more than that. Maybe not only the base stats are affected, but potentially also the scaling of stats. What does a Guardian typically have that makes them more suitable for a tank than, for example, an Assassin? They have higher defense and they have higher health and they have higher scalings in that regard. If the masks are somehow able to shift those stats in a way that takes away from the damage of the Assassin, especially the damage scaling, and increases their protection and health scaling instead, or maybe even affects their base damage value somehow, then you could have an Assassin shift more towards a supporty playstyle. This is just one of many examples of how the stat shift could work. If, however, that is what is at play here, then it would be interesting to know what the limits of this are. Because obviously, if items allow you to heavily shift your stats to flex into other roles, that would mean if somebody of that same role picks up that item instead, it could lead to them being way too strong. For example, a Guardian that's not planning to build into any sort of power because he wants to go full on support could pick up the same item and also get higher protections and health and potentially base scaling, so whichever stats are changed, in return for only losing maybe some power and some scalings along with that, which he really wouldn't care about, and that would make him way too strong. So there must be some sort of balancing mechanic at work here that, if this is something that just allows characters to shift and roll, makes sure that characters in that particular role don't get too strong by picking up these masks too. On the other hand, I could imagine something much simpler, like for example, the red mask being an aggressive mask that take away 10% of your maximum health, but in return increase your maximum power by 10% or similar. Obviously alongside with some other stats that the mask will probably have. Either way, it's gonna be very interesting to see how this develops. I'm very much looking forward to this patch now, as all the changes so far sound very, very promising, and it almost sounds like we're pretty much playing a new season without a new map here. And if that turns out to be true, I'll be more than happy. And with that, thank you guys very much for watching. I hope this was interesting and insightful. I hope to see you all for the next one tomorrow. Duke Sloth, out.